Welcome to All About Agatha, the podcast dedicated to reading and ranking every single mystery novel written by the Queen of Crime, Dame Agatha Christie. I am Kemper Donovan, and prepare to be shocked, listeners, but somehow the year 2025 has come and gone, and I never had the pleasure, during that whole time, of inviting best-selling author, mystery musical creator, and Poirot continuer, Sophie Hannah, onto the show. Well, I'm going to rectify this gross injustice right now. I'm going to do better in 2026, and I am going to interview Sophie Hannah this very moment. I don't even have to bring her in. She's right here. Sophie, as many of you already know, is a big friend of the podcast. She has been since the very beginning, and she is out with a new book. It's actually been out in England since the summer of 2025, and it just came out a little more than a week ago here in the United States. So now feels like a good time to talk about it. Welcome back, Sophie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I've missed the podcast. Well, I've been listening to it, but I've missed joining in with it.
I was going to say, hopefully not as a listener. I know you are a dedicated listener, but yes.
I am. I'm a devoted listener to every episode.
So your book is titled, No One Would Do What the Lamberts Have Done.
Yes.
To start us off, can you give us a sense of who the Lamberts are and a little non-spoilery hint or taste as to what it is they may have done?
Yes. So the Lamberts are a perfectly ordinary family, a mum, a dad, 2 children, boy and a girl, teenage children, and they have a very adorable Welsh Terrier pet dog called Champ Lambert. And he is, in fact, their second dog. They had another Welsh Terrier before Champ called Furbert. And the reason Furbert is called Furbert is that I've always wanted to name a dog Furbert. I think it's just such a good name for a dog. Anyway, so poor old Furbert died, and then they got Champ. So they are just a perfectly ordinary family going about their business. The kids are studying for exams. The parents are, doing their jobs. And then a malicious neighbour accuses Champ Lambert, the dog, of biting her daughter. And Champ is completely innocent. That's never a question in the book. There's no question of did he or didn't he bite this teenage girl. He definitely didn't, and we know that from the start. But for nefarious and spiteful reasons, this other family that lives just down the road from the Lamberts, called the Gavies, they have accused Champ Lambert of biting their daughter. And a policeman arrives on the Lamberts' doorstep saying that this accusation has been made and that there's going to be an investigation. And Sally Lambert, who is Sally's the mum, and she's absolutely devoted to, as she would put it, all her children, furry and non-furry. Mm-hmm. So she includes Champ, just as she included Furbert in the category of her children. She does not distinguish between human children and doggy children. As far as she's concerned, she is their mum, all of them. And she knows that her beloved Champ is now in danger because depending on how this investigation goes, obviously the police have said they have to look into it because there's been this report of this quite vicious bite. Sally knows that if this investigation goes the wrong way and if the authorities believe the Gavies and not her, then Champ is seriously at risk. He could be taken away as a dangerous dog by the authorities, which would just be the most monstrous injustice because Champ is gorgeous and cuddly and lovely and soft and was never hurt anyone. But Sally knows that, you can't predict the outcome of a legal investigation. And she knows that worst case scenario, if the police seize her dog, that they could end up putting him to sleep because that is what happens to dogs perceived to be dangerous by the law. And Sally is just not prepared to let anyone take her dog and potentially kill him. So she decides she's not going to let this investigation happen. She's not going to cooperate. She's not going to sit in her house with Champ there and wait and see and hope for the best. She decides she has no alternative but to take Champ and go on the run. And her family at first think she's a bit mad for even considering this possibility. And they say things like, but you've got a job and we've got school and college and dad's got a job and what's going on? But then various factors persuade them all to go with Sally and Champ. Mark, Sally's husband, does not want his wife tearing off across the country with the dog without him to sort of supervise and look after them. And the teenage children both think that going on the run with the dog, whose nickname by this point is the Furry Fugitive. I don't know whether you've seen the movie The Fugitive with Harrison Ford.
Oh, yes, of course.
My nickname for this book while I was writing it, I had two nicknames. One was the Furry Fugitive, the other was Gone Dog. After Gone Girl. And the teenage Lambert children decide that going on the run with Champ and their mum and their parents might be more fun than revising for boring exams. So the Lamberts go on the run in order to save the life of their beloved Champ. That is basically the premise of the book. And one of the reasons it appealed to me is that when I rewatched The Fugitive with Harrison Ford and when I rewatched the movie of Gone Girl, what I noticed immediately was that both the missing woman in Gone Girl and Harrison Ford, when he's on the run in The Fugitive, both of those people had people looking for them actively, like officers of the law were looking for them. But I realised that if you're a family that goes on the run with a Welsh Terrier that's been accused of biting a neighbour, no one's going to look for you. No police or official bodies are going to send a team of people to pursue you because they just haven't got the resources and it's never going to be a priority. And yet the Lamberts can't come back. So they have to go on the run and stay on the run because the minute they go back home, the authorities can find them again. The policeman can come around again, you know. So they can't go back. So they're kind of on the run, knowing they're not going back. But at the same time, no one is looking for them or pursuing them. So what do? What happens next?
It's very intriguing and very madcap. I mean, the vibe of this story is frenetic. It's propulsive. It really is. I read it very quickly, and you really do have to find out what happens next and next and next and next because there's constantly another step on this rather ridiculous journey. And I mean, not ridiculous from an emotional perspective, but just sort of ridiculous from a logistical sort of a perspective. And I mean, that is, I think there are two answers as to what is the thing that the Lamberts have done that no one else would do. And I think that is definitely the more obvious surface one and the one that we should consider probably solely without being too spoilery when we're talking about this novel, because that really is at the crux of this book, which is Sally loves her dog as much as her children. So if that is true, then of course she does what she does, right? Because her furry child is in jeopardy if they stay put. So like any parent, she is going to do what she has to do to ensure that her child is not in danger. And that is the sort of unusual thing that the Lamberts end up doing because it is for the sake of this dog. And there's even early on in the story, she makes a really bold statement, Sally, which is that she wishes that people could understand how much their dogs will mean to them, people who don't have dogs potentially and who are thinking, oh, maybe I should get a pet. And especially people who perhaps cannot have children, right? People who have tried to procreate but can't. She thinks to herself, if you get a dog, the dog will be just as meaningful. And she speaks from experience because she has human children and dog children. I don't want to make too much of this. And I always feel bad when I do it as to Agatha Christie, but I have to maximize my opportunity here that I'm speaking with the live author of this book that I just read and ask you how much this is based on your own experience, because I know that you love dogs and that you love your dogs and even had a little bit of a similar situation in that you did have a beloved dog that passed away and you have another dog now. And I was reading this book and there were so many times, Sophie, that I was just like, this is the Sophiest book of Sophie's that I've ever read. And I mean, other things too. You have a son and a daughter. I know their ages don't exactly line up to Ree and Toby, but It's similar. I have no sense of what your relationship is like with your husbands, but I would guess that maybe there are some aspects of the relationship between Sally and Mark that are similar. It felt like the most autobiographical of your works that I've come across. Am I out of line there? Feel free not to dodge that question if you would like, but I just had to ask it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There is so much of the book that comes directly from personal experience, my actual life. I mean, the specific plot points are all completely made up and completely invented, but the way Sally feels about her furry children is absolutely how I feel about my furry children. And the teenagers in the book are in many ways closely based on my two young adult children as they are now. I think actually the husband is probably the least closely based on my husband, because Mark Lambert, I mean, he grumbles a bit, but ultimately he goes along with everything Sally wants to do.
Yes.
My husband would certainly not do that. He wouldn't. He'd be a lot ruder and a lot less compliant if I was proposing that we all go on the run because of anything to do with a dog. So I made the fictional husband more compliant in order that the plot could happen. I should say, actually, one thing that I forgot to say when I was introducing the book. I mean, there's the sort of central story of how far will the Lamberts go to save Champ, and do they succeed in saving him? And that is sort of emotionally the heart of the book. But there's also, and equally importantly, a very twisty murder mystery plot. So at the very beginning of the book, we see two kind of police detective characters talking about whether or not a murder has occurred. One of them seems absolutely convinced that a murder has happened that needs to be taken seriously. And another one is saying to the one who's convinced there's been a murder, the other one is saying the autopsy found no murder, natural death. This was not a murder. And then the first police officer says, you need to read this. And what he then gives his colleague to read is a manuscript called No One Would Do What the Lamberts Have Done. So, the reader knows when they start reading this account of the Lamberts and the accusation against Champ Lambert, the reader knows that this is all going to be highly relevant to a story where there might have been a murder. And I would hope that readers, knowing it's a book by me, would kind of go, I bet there probably was a murder. And it's not a spoiler in any way to say that there is indeed a murder mystery plot in the book. There is indeed at least one death which is very much not down to natural causes. And, there's a murderer or murderers in the book. So it is very much a crime novel, and actually quite a dark one. You don't quite realize how dark it's going to get at the beginning and in the middle when you're reading about jolly antics with, a dog going on a road trip around the country to various nice hotels. So it's a kind of strange mixture of a book, I think. I don't know whether you agree, Kemper.
Absolutely. Well, I was going to ask you about the framing device because, that's something that Christie, actually, of course, we have to talk about Agatha Christie on this episode, which is not a stretch, by the way. We haven't even gotten into the Christie references in the story, but don't worry, we will get there. Christie uses framing devices every now and then. I had a great conversation with Dr. Michelle Kasmer about the framing device she uses in her short story Within a Wall. I also fairly recently discussed the frame in The Fourth Man. So, and I think, not coincidentally, those are two stories that deal somewhat in the supernatural as well. I think especially in The Fourth Man, the framing device there really accentuates, amplifies the supernatural, spooky effect of what Christie is going for in her story. And I wanted to ask you about why you did choose to use a frame in this way, because it immediately makes the book more complicated, right? Where you're like, okay, wait, so what is this that I'm reading? And now we have these police officers. And so the book itself that I thought I was reading is actually technically a found manuscript. It's a book within a book. And how is this all playing out? And similarly, and this is a kind of a very Christie-ish thing, there is this sense that perhaps the way that death that seems like it could have been a murder, it may or may not have been a murder, it might have actually been enacted by way of supernatural means. But then perhaps there's a in a Christie-ish way, there's an explanation that's entirely rational and has nothing to do with the supernatural. That all kind of seems to be wrapped up in the frame. And I just wanted to ask about your thought process as you were choosing to add that frame and to make this that much more complicated, because I think if you had wanted to, you probably could have done it all within the story itself. But I just love if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, the true answer is it just came to me in stages. The first thing I knew I wanted to write was the furry fugitive idea. Family goes on the run to save their dog. I love the fact that I thought that was something that, however distraught most families would be if their dog was threatened with possible unjust execution, probably most people wouldn't actually abandon their lives and go on the run. But I knew that I would. I would not. I just could not sit around waiting to see if the police came and took my dog away to be put down. It's not in my nature to do that. So I knew that I, in that situation, would take the dog, whether or not any of the family would come with me, I would go on the run to save my dog, and I would make sure I got him to safety before I considered coming back. So that was my first thought, was that I wanted to write a book about a family that did that. And also about how the family relationships change. And, it's like a family in crisis. They're all, suddenly pulled out of their normal lives, and they're hiding out in doggy daycare facilities and hotels in the Lake District and people's houses. And, how that changed the family relationships and them as people, right? So that was my first idea. And I loved that idea. I thought that's more than enough for a book. And then I had the idea of the policeman coming by the manuscript in the way that, basically the frame idea. That idea came to me, and my first thought was, no, I can't do that. I can't do that. This is a different kind of novel. It's not one of my kind of normal crime novels. It's a book about a family that wants to save its dog. Doesn't need to have police and murder. But this idea wouldn't go away. So then I thought, right, this idea is not going to go away. It's just like bothering me at the back of my mind. So I'll just ask a few people, clever literary types that I'm friends with or related to, and I'll just tell them the idea for the frame story. And I'm sure they'll say, no, don't overcomplicate it. And everyone I told the idea, their eyes just lit up and said, oh my God, that would make it so much better. That would just add an extra layer of amazingness. You've definitely got to do that. So I thought, okay. And what was weird was when they said that, my inner reaction was like, yes, like I just really wanted to do it. And then the same thing happened again when I came up with an idea for a really quite shocking and dark twist at the end. And again, I told all the same people, I said, look, I've had this twist idea. It's probably just taking it one step too far, isn't it? You don't want to over twist at the end of a book. And again, everyone I said it to, their eyes lit up and they went, oh my God, that's so dark. That's so brilliant. You've got to do it. And again, I was like, yes. And that told me that I actually really did want the most ambitious and boldest version of this book. And I'm so glad, I have to say, not that I'm an objective opinion at all. I wrote the book, so, I'm very, very biased, but I'm so glad that I did it exactly the way I did it, because I think without the frame and the twist that then leads to, I don't think it would be as powerful a book. I think it packs such a punch because of that, because of the kind of darker, more twisty frame that there is.
I think that's fair. I think for me, what I immediately thought while I was reading it, and then especially after I finished it, was that it's rare for a book to be so fun, but also to require so much from a reader. It's both entertaining and page turnery, but also not spoon-fed and requires a lot of thought and kind of parsing through and a little bit of work. And that's bold. Like that, and that I think is probably why you had that initial hesitation where you're like, oh, well, it's almost seems to be pulling in two different directions. But I think the overall effect is quite pleasing. And I really enjoyed it for that reason, because I love books that are meant to be entertaining. I mean, this is why I'm a Christie fan. I mean, I think the way in which Christie can make a book easy to read it's sort of the ultimate genius in a writer, right? That you can make something go down as easily as she does. But then that doesn't mean that you have to stop there and not think a lot about it. And I think this book is doing that very much in the reader's face, saying, yes, you might, you're enjoying the story, but there's more there. There's more going on, and you have to figure this out. Can you figure it out? I'm not going to give you the answers. And I mean, is it too spoilery to say who the murder victim, the maybe murder victim is, Sophie? Do you not want me to say that?
It is a bit too spoilerish to say. Yes. Okay. But I think you're right. So it definitely is a book that you will enjoy more if you actually like thinking and going, okay, what does all this mean? What am I being told here? What's my opinion of all this? And I love that myself. I love being given enough that I can have a valid opinion about what I think it means. So in that sense, yes, it does require some careful thought from the reader and full attention to be paid. However, I do also believe, because I do like to tie up loose ends, really. I don't like to make people work too hard. What I would say is, I think I've provided ample clues and stuff that, like, you basically do know what's happened by the end. Like, oh, no, there's one thing that you don't know, which you are invited to have an opinion about. I know what the truth is, and readers can make up their own mind. But that most of the solution to the kind of mystery, it's all there for you to put together.
Yes.
Yeah. It's not like readers will finish and go, I've no idea who did what or why. You basically know, because of the heavy clues and information I've given you, you basically know who did what and why. There's just one thing where you don't quite know, where I'm hoping readers will think, well, it could be this character, it could be that character, it could be both of them. But there's a lot that I do tie up, I would say, though just maybe not in a kind of obvious way. It's not like in my Poirot novels where Poirot's are there at the end going, let me explain absolutely everything, and so that you understand absolutely everything. It's more kind of like, here's everything we need, now we can form an opinion.
Exactly. You can, and that's such a puzzle mystery kind of an exercise, right? Where it's active reading. You're rewarding active reading where you're saying, here are all the dots. Here are the means to connect the dots. The one thing you're not doing that is done in a classic Christie-esque puzzle mystery is the denouement. There isn't that. There isn't and here is the connecting of the dots. And, this is the way that it all lays out. That's not there, but the tools to do that are there.
The very last chapter, actually, there are two characters, I won't say who they are, literally discussing who they think did what and why. I mean, so it is all there. All the things one might think and conclude are laid out by these two characters at the end. So the reader, if they want to have an easier ride, they can go, okay, well, I'm just going to agree with this guy or that guy.
Right.
But I mean, one thing I feel I should say, because it's quite interesting, it's obviously, I think it's obviously a murder mystery. I mean, you couldn't say it's not a murder mystery, because there are some very mysterious murder-related events in it, and there's murder in it, right? And it's a mystery with twists. Having said that, as much as it's a murder mystery, it is also a literary novel. And I didn't really sort of intend it to be, but someone who read it before it was published in the UK said to me, she said, I kept thinking, why is this so different from Sophie's other books, even though it's a murder mystery? And then I realised that it's actually a literary novel. And she said the book that it most reminded her of was The Black Prince by Iris Murdoch, which I don't know whether you've read that, but that is a very literary novel. And as soon as she said that, I was like, yes, that is actually the difference. It is a murder mystery, but it is also a literary novel. So anyone who's reading it expecting a very commercial genre kind of literary novel will be flummoxed, because it is not that at all.
Yeah. It's kind of, well, it's not that, and it's also not a fully straightforward murder mystery, obviously.
No.
So
No.
it's, and there's always a danger of that, right? It's the falling between two stools thing, right? I mean, I think you have the foundation and comfort of a career that you've built, that you, I think, can rely on, and your readers sort of know that they're going to get something. You know, they know they're going to get a certain level of enjoyment and interest and satisfaction out of one of your books. And I think it's okay if it's a little different from what came before, because you have this oeuvre of your own to rely on. You wouldn't necessarily want this to be your first book, because I think then it would be a little bit like, oh, okay, where exactly does this rest? Or maybe you would. I mean, that sort of is the age-old question of how audacious can we be when it comes to genre labels, and is it okay to kind of be mixing these things and going between them. But this is definitely a book that I think is doing that. And I agree that it feels a bit different from anything else that you've written. And we corresponded a little bit before we were having this conversation. And you said in some ways it's a little bit like a Mary Westmacott novel for you. And I thought that was a really interesting reference for two reasons. I mean, one, I obviously know that you think about Agatha Christie as much as, if not more than, I do. So that doesn't surprise me that you're thinking that way. But Agatha Christie, and more specifically Mary Westmacott, is actually referenced in this very novel. And I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. Could you just give a quick sense of the sort of obvious way, the more surface way in which Mary Westmacott figures into the plot of the Lamberts? Because it was very amusing. And I think readers will really appreciate it.
Yes, of course. And I will say, actually, it's quite interesting. When I said to you that I saw this book as more like Mary Westmacott, I didn't mean that Lamberts, as I call it. I can't possibly every time refer to it as what the Lamberts have done, so I just call it Lamberts. It's not that I think Lamberts bears any resemblance to a Mary Westmacott.
Oh, no. Yes. No, I realize you were making an analogy to your work.
It was more that, just in the way that Agatha allowed herself to write a different kind of book under a different name.
Yes.
I was kind of thinking of Lamberts as a slightly different kind of book, and allowing myself to write it, though under the same name. But yeah, Mary Westmacott and Agatha Christie feature prominently. So the Lamberts live in a village called Swaffham Tilney, which is a very flat, quiet, affluent fenland village in Cambridgeshire. So flat near the fens, sort of on the edge of Cambridgeshire near Norfolk, basically. And it's a very villagey village. People keep an eye on whether weeds are growing up other people's garden walls. And if someone lets their weeds grow for too long, making the village look untidy, then this will be very much resented by the other villagers. It's that kind of village. And there is a village book club. And the people in the village book club decide at a certain point that it's going to focus on Agatha Christie books in particular. A very, very sensible decision there for that book club to make. And then one day, one of the members of the book club, and this is not at all the main plot of Lamberts. This is just like a side thing that's going on, but it influences the power balance and relationships within the village, which becomes relevant as the story progresses. But anyway, so there's this book club. It's an Agatha Christie themed book club, and one of the members suggests reading a Mary Westmacott novel on the grounds that is an Agatha Christie book. And the sort of head of the book club is scandalized by this idea and says, no, this is for Agatha Christie books only. At which point some people say, well, hang on a minute, Mary Westmacott novels are Agatha Christie books. After all, Agatha Christie wrote them. And then other people say, yes, but they weren't published as Agatha Christie novels. They're clearly not intended to be Agatha Christie novels by their own author. They're intended as something different. And basically, a vicious and almost psychotic book club war breaks out between different factions who call themselves, the Agatha purists and the pro-Marys. And pretty soon, the whole village is in disarray and no one's speaking to each other. And what they've so acrimoniously fallen out about is whether or not a Mary Westmacott novel is an Agatha Christie novel.
And if
I found that a very entertaining subplot to write because, earlier on you referred to Lamberts as a madcap plot. And I love that word because actually what the Lamberts do, going on the run with their dog and all the sort of adventures they have, is kind of like people hearing about it would think it was mad. That's why they say no one would do what the Lamberts have done, even though the Lamberts have in fact done it. And even though people do very mad things all the time, people are not sane and sensible. People do all kinds of crazy shit, right? But still, we like to believe people are more normal than they are. So we say things like, well, no one would do that about things that people do in fact do all the time. And probably people reading the subplot about the Agatha Christie book club and how it all goes so terribly wrong, probably people would think, oh, that's mad. No book club would do that. But actually, yes, they would. Book clubs, any little committee or little organization can suddenly be sworn enemies over the tiniest of things. And so what was really important to me throughout the book is to accurately reflect I won't say sort of madness because I don't know whether it is madness, but people do have bizarre motivations and bizarrely strong feelings over things that other people would think were completely unimportant. And so is the book itself mad, or is the book in fact... Okay, I'll tell you what I think. I think this book is really very sane and sensible because what it's doing is I think reflecting in a very accurate way the actual bizarreness of real life and real people. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And of course you would have to feel that way because you are the author of the book. And I think that comes through. I mean, this is a book that is delighting in, wallowing in the sort of petty rivalries and minutia that rules people's day, and doing so, to be clear, also in an extremely contemporary way. I mean, there's a whole social media element to this, the Lambert family on the run. And I love the way that you do that because I never really felt like I was trapped by the social media of it all. It just gets referenced so that we know it's there and it's important, but it doesn't subsume the story, which was fantastic. But you needed that because, of course, there would be an element of that. And all of the little rivalries in the town of the weeds growing on the walls and the way that the book club argues over Mary Westmacott versus Agatha Christie. I mean, those are the sort of little details that reminded me oddly of Anthony Trollope a little bit. I think he, so delighted in that kind of minutia when he was constructing his fictional village settings in the Barsetshire Chronicles, for example. And it ends up feeling so real.
And I think this is why I partly say it's a literary novel. So I feel I have to kind of warn people about this because when someone compared it to The Black Prince by Iris Murdoch, it made me think, Iris Murdoch is constantly and in great detail in her books describing the strange, bizarre, unique, kind of warped ways in which people behave. Mm-hmm. And it's also another book I read recently, which I feel is in the same kind of zone as Lamberts, is a book by Jonathan Coe called The Proof of My Innocence, which is also very much a murder mystery, but of a very literary kind. And you might think from the title that it's referring to someone's innocence being proved, but actually there's a book within the book called My Innocence, and there's a bound proof copy of the book. So the proof of my innocence is actually a double meaning. It's the proof of his innocence, but also the proof copy of his book, which is called My Innocence. And I just read that book by coincidence last week, and I thought, this is a literary novel, and it reminds me of Lambert. So all these clues kept making me think, I think I might have accidentally written a quite literary novel in that it's kind of doing literary things. It's not just like straightforwardly telling a complex story. It's doing complex things with the form of a mystery novel, I think.
Absolutely. And
not deliberately. Just like all these things occurred to me and I knew I loved them all. And so I decided to just really go for it.
Well, and I think you can feel some of that spontaneity in the book too. That's, I think, part of the madcap kind of propulsive spirit to the story. But what I also really appreciated, just even sticking with Mary Westmacott, and more specifically the rose and the yew tree, because it's the rose and the yew tree that they argue over, right? I think that's the book that gets chosen, that they want, one of the members wants to do the rose and the yew tree and the other one doesn't. So we have that little weird kind of, side plot tangent in the book, which I very much enjoyed, of course. But then later on, the rose and the yew tree comes back in a much deeper way and is used sort of as an analogy to what may be happening in this very found manuscript and in the murder mystery overall. And I really loved this because you actually came on to the All About Agatha Patreon with me and with Catherine Brobeck many years ago to discuss the Rose and the Yew Tree, because you had just read it. And I think you contacted us and you were like, I need to talk to someone about the Rose and the Yew Tree. Do you want to just all talk about it? And we were like, we could do a Patreon episode. Sure. And we did. And it was fabulous. And I remember you talking about the Rose and the Yew Tree on that episode, and how there's an argument to be made that it too is a secret murder mystery, that there is a way to read the Rose and the Yew Tree, that something is going on here in a subtextual way that actually involves the death of one person and who may be ultimately responsible for that death. And we won't get into the weeds of the Rose and the Yew Tree, but you make this point in the Lamberts and suggest that perhaps, or at least somehow the suggestion made its way to me as a reader. I don't know how of overt it is, but that this is precisely what's going on with this story, that there is a way to read Lambert similar to the Rose and the Yew Tree, where at the very end of the story, we get some more information that makes us realize, oh, the way that this whole mysterious death, the way that it seems, it's not at all what it seems, and there's actually another explanation for what was going on.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, totally. And it didn't, again, it just occurred to me as I was going along, and I loved it, so I put it in. I adore The Rose and the Yew Tree. I think it is a brilliant Mary Westmacott novel, a brilliant Agatha Christie novel. And as you know, I think it is a hidden, very, very secret hidden murder mystery. It doesn't advertise itself as a murder mystery, but I think there is a murder plot in there, very definitely, and somebody who gets away with murder, very definitely, although they end up harming themselves arguably more than they harm the victim. Now, I can't prove this. There's no proof of it, but there's lots of evidence to support it. But at the same time, someone could look at that evidence and go, yeah, but that's not what Agatha Christie meant. You're just seeing something that she didn't mean to put in there. So, yeah, that was very much in my mind when I thought of the final twist for Lamberts, and I realised that it was going to turn on its head. The final twist really changes things. It doesn't at all invalidate everything the reader has already read. In fact, it makes everything more meaningful and powerful, but you get a very different story when you finish the whole thing. So that absolutely was inspired by The Rose and the Yew Tree, but also one of the most sort of influential characters in the book, Sally's friend and neighbour, Corinne Sullivan, says about The Rose and the Yew Tree, because she's one of the people who's in favour of the Agatha Christie book club being allowed to discuss The Rose and the Yew Tree. And she says, it is an Agatha Christie novel. It's even a murder mystery, but it just doesn't spoon feed you the answers at the end. And then she says, I actually prefer, the best kind of murder mysteries are the ones where you're not spoon fed all the answers and you have to kind of work it out for yourself. And of course, when I wrote that bit, I thought, aha, and that is a bit like this book that I'm writing here. So all of that was totally deliberate and I was aware of it. But again, it just sort of came spontaneously as I was writing. I didn't plan it in advance.
Yeah, and I think that gives such a good sense of what reading this book is like. It is a book that is commenting on itself. The characters are winking more at the reader, I'd say, than each other, actually, because the story itself is fully grounded. There's nothing spoofy or sort of satirical about what's happening. I mean, these are all real people, and everything that happens to them is very real, and the way that they react is emotionally grounded. But you're playing some games here as an author reader. And I think you're letting your reader in on some of those tricks. And again, giving them the tools to say, oh, okay, I don't have to just take everything at face value each time it's given to me. There's a little bit more going on here. And that frame, I mean, whenever you have a framing device in a story, that is just an indicator that there's more going on than in a quote unquote normal story. So it's right there from the very beginning, but you certainly follow through on the literary novel plus aspect of things here. And I really enjoyed it.
One thing I've been delighted by is that a couple of people who've read the book sort of pre-publication said to me, I immediately had to go and buy and read The Rose and the Yew Tree. I was like, yes.
Yes.
The more I can get to read that book, the happier I am.
Don't touch that dial. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of our episode. We just wanted to take a moment to ask you, our dear listeners, for a favor.
If you haven't already done so, we would very much appreciate it if you take a moment to, give us a rating or a review wherever you're listening to this podcast.
It really helps the podcast out because ratings and reviews make it much easier for other Christie fans such as yourselves to find our podcast.
And the more ratings and reviews we get, the more people we can reach.
It should take you a matter of seconds, and lucky you, we're going to provide you with those seconds right now, so go to it.
Thank you so much. And now, back to our regularly scheduled programming.
So I did also have to ask, so the Gavies are not based on a real family then?
No. The Gavies are
Thank
not.
God.
Thank God. No, but let me think. The Gavies are based on an exaggerated version of the worst traits of many, many people I've encountered over the years, including me. My baddies are always a little bit based on me. The Gavies are, I think it's fair to say, baddies. So Leslie Gavey, who is the mum of the Gavey family, and she's like Sally Lamberts' age. So Sally and Leslie are the ones who meet first. And Leslie Gavey, her first appearance in the book is when she is standing outside the Lamberts' house crying and staring at it. And we later, this isn't a spoiler, I can reveal this without it spoiling anything. We later discover that the reason she's standing staring at the house and crying is that she was hoping to buy that house. It's about to go on the market for sale. And she was thinking she might buy it. So she came to look at it in the flesh, as it were, and it was much smaller than she had hoped it would be. And so she's basically crying because this house that she was hoping to buy, that's not even for sale yet, she just happens to know it's going to be up for sale. She's like staring at Sally Lambert's house and weeping because it's not big enough for her, which she later tells Sally as though this is something Sally has done wrong, having a house that's not big enough for Leslie's needs, even though Leslie hasn't bought it yet. So that is obviously, insane, unhinged behaviour, but it's very, very, very loosely based on me at my most unhinged. Like there have been occasions where I've been very, very upset because a house that has nothing to do with me turned out not to be the house I'm going to buy because I found something I don't like about it. And, because I'm not completely bonkers, I just kind of go, don't be silly, Sophie, you're being mad, and I get over it. But I quite like to take my kind of worst moments and impulses and exaggerate them. Like, what if I didn't have a filter? What if I didn't have a sort of normal side to keep my weird side in check? Then what might I do? So I guess that was partly where Leslie came from. The daughter of the Gavey family, Tess, is just a nasty... Actually, she is based on... when my kids were school age, I heard about a lot of very nasty teenage girl behaviour. The Gavey daughter is kind of an amalgam of all the incidents I heard of, the worst of all the anecdotes about bitchy teenagers and what they get up to. But no, none of the Gaveys are based on specific people. They're just sort of a bundle of unappealing impulses.
I'm realizing that, yes, you and real estate is a thing, because I remember in the Hercule Poirot's Silent Night that the house being built on the sort of like the crumbling cliff, it's just such a specific thing. But wasn't that inspired by some like real estate, online real estate digging that you were doing? So this is clearly, you think about real estate a lot, don't you?
I did. In fact, my sixth crime novel, which in the US is called The Other Woman's House, in England it's called Lasting Damage, but in America it's The Other Woman's House. That book starts with a woman looking on a property website in the middle of the night, and she clicks on the video tour of the house for sale that she's looking at, and there's a dead body in the living room. So then she screams, her husband comes, they play the tour again, and the body's gone.
Oh, wow.
And that, at the time I wrote that, I thought, this is a real estate thriller. In fact, I think I said to quite a few people at the time, I've invented a new subgenre, the real estate thriller, or the right move or Zillow thriller.
Well, I have always held that one of the best concepts for Agatha Christie's short stories in particular is the adventure of the cheap flat. Where it's the couple who were like, "Oh, we just got this flat and it's amazing and it's so cheap," and it's like, "Oh, no! Like you must be in grave danger, because there is no way that anyone would be able to get that flat for that cheap. There must be something nefarious going on," and indeed there is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I obviously really, really enjoyed this novel, and I think that there's a lot. I mean, it's funny. So often I'm so used to talking about your novels, and not just your Poirot continuation novels. Obviously, there's a lot in those novels for Agatha Christie fans, but even in your mysteries. But I would still say, in a very different way, I think that there is a lot here for Christie fans and people who think a little bit more deeply about Christie. Because you know what? I think a lot of us Christie fanatics also enjoy literary novels. And that's what's also so great about this, that if you do have the courage to kind of go beyond genre and create something that is crossing over and doing more than one thing at once, it's novel, right? It's an interesting reading experience, and one that we don't always get. And I think a lot of people really appreciate that. And I know I certainly did. So I have to imagine that the Lamberts are going to find many, many new fans in their furry fugitive progress across England.
Excellent. Well, I have been very pleased so far by the numbers of people who've said, actually, I would do what the Lamberts did. Because at first I thought I was the only one. But at least 3 other readers have said, yeah, I would also, in that circumstance, I would go on the run with my dog rather than risk the authorities harming my dog. Oh, I should say, actually, that in a way, the whole idea of a family doing whatever they have to save their dog was inspired by a family situation. So my husband's brother and his wife had a lovely dog, a flat coat retriever, that was running in the park one day. And I mean, I wasn't there. I don't know what happened, but a woman fell over. And the next thing they knew, I don't know whether it was a policeman or somebody in authority, some figure of authority was at their door. And they basically had to sort of accept an antisocial behavior order being issued against their dog.
Wow.
They were told, okay, you could refuse to say, yes, my dog behaved antisocially. So then that would lead to further investigation, and the result might be that your dog is deemed dangerous. So their dog wasn't carted off by the authorities, but, someone turned up on the doorstep saying your dog has been accused of a thing and bad things might happen to your dog. And literally, when I heard this story, I just like the coldest, iciest chill went down my spine, and I could feel my fists clenching. I was like, if anyone ever tried to harm my dog, woe betide them. So that was partly where the inspiration came from. And also another source of inspiration was that, obviously I can't say who and what their structural relationship is to me and my dogs, but somebody did repeatedly try to harm my first dog, Brewster, by, whenever they were in my house, deliberately opening the front door and leaving it wide open in the hope that he would get out onto the street and, I don't know, run off or get run over. And that was something that I noticed as soon as we got the dog. Whenever this person was in my house, I would suddenly notice the front door was standing wide open. And on one occasion, the dog did actually get out and nearly get squashed by a car.
Oh,
Like, this is what I mean. When people have said to me, oh, it's such a mad story, I'm like, no. It's a very sane story about, like, I know it sounds flippant, but honestly, I kind of feel that one of the things I'm trying to do in the book, and to a certain extent in everything I write, is to kind of chronicle the actual warpedness and weirdness of everyday real life. I think most books like to tidy up human personalities and behavior. But if you're going to write realistically about what we humans are actually like, there's going to be a lot of stuff that seems really kind of out there and weird and outlandish, because certainly in my experience, that is what actual humans are in fact like. And so to me, the way to write about that sanely is to write about it realistically rather than sort of airbrush and tidy up human personalities, because there's just a lot of rampant insanity out there and dysfunctional behavior, as proven by the fact that, there's someone in my social circle who is still in my social circle who at least 3 times tried to kill my first dog. So, those are just the facts of the case. At first, I just strongly suspected they were trying to kill my dog, but then, because of a weird combination of circumstances that I won't bore you with, I actually was able to get proof, and I saw them with my own eyes going to the front door, standing it open, standing the inner door open, and then walking away. And that was when I knew that this leaving open of the door wasn't an accident, but was a deliberate thing to harm the dog.
Well, I won't ask you to divulge who that person is, but I think convincing behavior does not have to be predictable behavior, right? Because there's nothing worse than feeling like we know exactly what the characters in a fictional story are going to do. But on the other hand, there's also nothing worse than feeling like what someone just did in a book is completely unconvincing and unbelievable, right? Where you're like, this doesn't seem like a human being. But good fiction rests in between the two. And I would definitely place this book there, where it is not predictable what happens in this book, because there are extreme extenuating circumstances and extreme characters and personalities, but they feel convincing and they feel real. And I think you're absolutely right. Weird stuff happens all the time, and weird people exist. And of course, weird is the most relative word in the English language. So the joy and zest of writing is in figuring that out and getting to carve out reality in that sort of an interesting and unpredictable way. And, we've talked a lot about how Christie really does that, especially with her outlandish hooks, right? Where she starts a book with an outlandish hook, and you think, I know we've talked before about A Murder is Announced, because it's really one of the best, where you say, there is no way that you could construct this village of real humans with real human motivations, and one of them has made the decision to announce a murder in the newspaper. There's no way that you can have that make sense and wrap up the story. And then you watch her do it. And she does it brilliantly and interestingly. And there are so many quirky, strange characters in that story, but you believe every one of them, and you believe what each of them does every step of the way. And I think you can say the same thing about the Lamberts madcap journey. It's madcap, but that doesn't mean that it isn't believable.
Yeah. And I think I'm attracted to writers who reflect that kind of unusual, the fact that often when we're under stress and under pressure, our thinking will get quite warped and extreme. And that's just as a natural result of being under pressure. But I think I like crime writers and writers in general whose work reflects this. And Christie is a brilliant example of that. Another great example is Ruth Rendell, who both in her Ruth Rendell novels and her Barbara Vine novels, she continually, over and over again, portrays very dysfunctional, warped and strange people as just being everywhere and every day. So it's not that she's trying to say, look, this is normal. She's trying to say, look how abnormal all these people are in their thought processes and how dysfunctional they are. And yet dysfunctional, warped minds are just everywhere. And if we're honest with ourselves, we can all find an element of that in ourselves, right? When we think of, the strangest thought we ever had, the one that we wouldn't tell anyone we'd had, but it's there, right? We all have this sort of, especially when under emotional stress, this tendency to kind of go a bit odd and go to extremes. And so it's been interesting how through writing Lamberts, I've realized that my taste as a reader is very much for those kinds of books, which is why, I love The Black Prince by Iris Murdoch and Agatha Christie and Ruth Rendell, whereas I'm not so keen on books that seem to want to portray a world where everyone's broadly speaking quite normal and a jolly good sort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's something in that. And it makes me realize that in some ways, I don't think this holds true for all Christie novels, but some of my favorite Christies, especially when I'm thinking of murderers and victims, some of my favorite Christie novels are the ones where the murderers are likable and the victims are unlikable. And I know that she didn't love necessarily playing that game. She was not about raising up a Byronic hero or a murderer or an anti-hero. And she was very much, invested in the plight of the innocent. But that doesn't mean that we don't have to be beholden to an author's intention when we're enjoying their output. And for example, After the Funeral, there's a reason why, and After the Funeral, we won't say who the murderer is, but there's a reason why that murderer was crowned the murderer of murderers when I went through my ranking of murderers. And The Hollow, this is just something that's come up recently with a bunch of listener emails, so I have it in my head. But the victim of The Hollow, not too much of a spoiler to mention his name, John Christo. There are so many people who just loathe that man, and I completely understand why. But the fact that he is as loathsome as he is as a murder victim is part of what makes that novel so brilliant.
Of course, that also massively applies to Murder on the Orient Express and Then There Were None.
Of course.
Yeah. And I think you're right. So Christie definitely doesn't approve of or condone any murder, but what she does do, and After the Funeral's a brilliant example of this, Christie really believes in and inhabits the psyche of that murderer and of all her murderers. So you may not, it's not that she in any way sympathizes with them, but because she inhabits their warped thoughts so fully and brilliantly, she does allow the reader to have the opportunity to sympathize with them if they want to.
And to recognize aspects of the murderer in themselves, which absolutely happens in After the Funeral, and I think, as you said, in some of her best, especially Murder on the Orient Express is practically built on that. On the fact that familiarity or recognizability. And there's a little bit of a similar exercise going on. You finish No One Would Do What the Lamberts Have Done, and boy, are you in Sally Lambert's warped perspective by the end of that novel. And some of what she believes, and including, again, the supernatural, is so convincing when you really are in that viewpoint. And
I think you're certainly convinced that Sally 100% believes in the supernatural.
That is true.
Because one of her furry children died some years ago, and she absolutely believes he's still there with the family. She leaves his dog crate. She leaves the door open so that his ghost can get in and out, or his spirit can get in and out. And her husband, Mark, takes the mickey out of her and says, if he's a ghost, surely he doesn't need the door to be open through it. But Sally is adamant that the door to the dog crate has to be open so Ferbert's spirit can feel, welcome, and that they know he's still there. So again, the reader is offered the opportunity to believe in the supernatural along with Sally, but it's not a supernatural book. If you don't believe in anything supernatural, then there is an explanation for everything that doesn't involve anything that isn't, based in the material world.
Right. Well, like Poirot, we can believe in the power of the supernatural, right? You believe in the belief, and we can believe in Sally's belief in the supernatural, but that doesn't mean that we as readers need to buy into the supernatural. I mean, it would have been very surprising to me if there were only a supernatural reading of this book, because that's such a Christie thing to do, to infuse a book with the supernatural and make the supernatural explanation eminently convincing, but then to slip in a rational, non-supernatural explanation at the end is so satisfying to a Christie lover.
Speaking of, actually, since your podcast is listened to by Christie lovers, a book I mentioned earlier, The Black Prince by Iris Murdoch, it just occurred to me that is a book that some of your listeners might not have read. It is, I think it's one of the best novels ever written, but it's very much a murder mystery. It's one where you really don't get a solution, though. You really have to take a view. You're given several possible theories, and you really have to choose which one you believe at the end. But nevertheless, it is an absolutely brilliant novel, and I think Agatha fans would love it, because one thing that Agatha Christie and Iris Murdoch have in common is that sort of deep, sensitive intelligence in relation to like the human predicament and the human psyche. Iris Murdoch is a slightly more difficult read than Agatha Christie, but I just love that book, and I'm sure lots of Christie fans, if they haven't read it, would love that book too. The Black Prince by Iris Murdoch.
Well, I've now got to add that to my TBR because I have never read The Black Prince. I've read The Sea. I love that book.
Oh, yeah. Amazing. Oh, well, if you read The Black Prince, if you ever want to do a Patreon episode about The Black Prince as a detective novel, I'm your man.
You're on.
Trying to get invited back onto the podcast.
Oh, please. I would love to have you on the regular podcast Patreon. Yes. Okay. You're on, Sophie. I'm going to read up, and I will make you follow through on that promise.
Amazing.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast yet again. And I know that you have a Poirot continuation novel. You have your 6th of these Poirots, and this is Hercule Poirot in a New Year's Eve themed mystery. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. And in fact, probably by the time we air this episode, it will probably be out already. It's called The Last Death of the Year, and it's set on a Greek island on New Year's Eve. Poirot and Catchpool are invited to this Greek island for a New Year's Eve. Catchpool thinks that it's just a nice holiday, but when he gets there, he realizes that Poirot hasn't told him the full truth, and they've been invited there for a reason. And very soon after their arrival there, a murderer strikes, perhaps more than once. So yeah, that's The Last Death of the Year.
I cannot wait to read it. And it makes perfect sense that after your Christmas-themed Poirot, you would have a New Year's themed Poirot. So
yes, exactly.
Maybe if you do number 7, it could be Valentine's Day.
Yes, or Easter, maybe, or Mother's Day.
Just go around the calendar. All right. Thank you so much, Sophie. It's been a delight as always.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on again.
Thank you so much to Sophie Hannah, a true friend of the All About Agatha podcast. Always interested to see what Sophie is up to. And I've thrown up a link to her website in the show notes so that you can check out No One Would Do What the Lamberts Have Done if you're interested, and Sophie's many other offerings, including that new Poirot continuation novel, The Last Death of the Year. For my next episode, I will be doing part 2 of my listener mailbag. I've got a lot of letters to go through, so get excited. If you should like any bonus content, you can head on over to the podcast's Patreon page. There's a link in the show notes. For February, I am discussing Verdict, the original play by Agatha Christie. That is a perfect example of the sort of Agatha Christie content that we examine over on Patreon. There's so much more to Agatha Christie than her 66 full-length mystery novels and even her short stories, which have all been picked over on this regular podcast feed. You can also email me at allaboutthedame@gmail.com. You can find the podcast on Instagram at allaboutagatha, and you can find me at my author website, www.kemperdonovan.com. Links to Instagram and my website in the show notes, and also links to the first 2 books in my Ghostwriter Mysteries series, which are available for purchase, and a link to pre-order the 3rd book in that series, titled Sweet Spot. That book is not out until July of this year, but pre-orders help me so very much. So thank you in advance for that. And thank you in advance for any ratings and or reviews you might see fit to send my way. They are very much appreciated. And I'll see you next time. Bye.